for today. We're going to talk financial talk. We had some questions last week, and they started getting into financial questions and everything. So I said, tune in next Monday, because today we have Blake Early from Cream City Mortgage here to answer your questions and to shed a little light on what the lenders are up against, especially with their underwriters.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the intro,
Always.
Joni. I actually made this presentation a little more prevalent to actual contract writing as far as like what we look for as lenders and what underwriters look for. But I would say, and any general financial or mortgage questions, just feel free to ask. And this can be very much conversational more than me just going through slides. So if you want me to get started, I can.
Sure, go ahead. Sounds great.
All right, cool. Well, I think I recognize a lot of names on here, but for those of you that don't know me, Blake Early, founder and loan officer at Cream City Mortgage. Cream City Mortgage started, for all intents and purposes, in February of this year. I was with Fairway Independent Mortgage for a couple of years before that, but decided to move from the retail side to start this brokerage. And basically what that means is we can shop rates and closing costs around on your behalf. So we generally have lower rates and lower closing costs than some of the retail lenders out there and some of the banks out there. So that's just a little Cream City Mortgage history for you guys. So like I said, this presentation is going to be more directed towards what we look for in contracts and when we get amendments and offer to purchases from you guys. Some of the most common things we see is when we get an amendment with a seller concession or a price change. I always tell my agents less is more. This is a good example of what we would look for. Just tell me what the seller credit is, the dollar amount, and maybe a line saying like inspection's been cleared. I don't want an amendment that's got the seller concession and then 10 other lines saying the roof needs to be repaired, the furnace isn't working, all that stuff, because we don't want the underwriter to question that stuff. So my advice to you would be just do two separate contracts, one with the seller credit or the price change, and then do another amendment with all those other repairs that might be needed. And you don't need to send that one to me because that doesn't really affect the loan process. So here's a good example of one. Simple, less is more. Here's the credit, move on. Here's one that got flagged. They were changing the purchase price from 240 to 243. But then underneath it, they mentioned all these things about the roof needing to be repaired and what they were going to do about that. And I reached out to the agent. I said, hey, break this into two separate amendments for me. Just tell me the price change, and then you can do your roof repair in another amendment. And the buyer's agent, the agent actually said, well, this is a FSBO. They're working with a lawyer. They're going to insist on doing it this way. This is the path of least resistance. So they asked me to send this one in. And sure enough, the underwriter comes back and says, hey, we need paid invoices, we need lien waivers, and we need pictures of the roof being completed. And this was all within a week of closing. So it just adds more to your plate. It adds more to our plate. More things could go wrong with the roof. So don't send me this.
And I'd love to just tack on for our new agents. These amendments are the results of inspection contingency negotiations. And so that's why Blake is just highlighting the best possible way to write these things for underwriting purposes. But I just wanted to backtrack and just make sure that our new agents understood, again, that these agreements are the results of inspection contingency negotiations. So this would all be executed after an accepted offer.
Yeah, this is, good point, Steph. This is all mid-process sort of contract management.
Yeah.
Okay, what to use as interest rates in your contract? I would say the best advice is ask the loan officer that you're working with as you're writing the contract. I know I send out an email once a week and Gustavo sends out an email once a week with a rate that you should use as a buffer. But the kicker is everybody has a different interest rate, right? Somebody with an 800 credit score rate is going to have a lot better rate than somebody with a 690. So what you see on the internet or what you see on a website might not be, what your client is getting. So reach out to us. We'll tell you what to use. We always add a buffer for a couple of reasons. One, it's going to make your offer stronger. I've actually had a couple of listing agents in the last couple of weeks reach out to me, and they weren't even my files. They're just listing agents that I happen to be friends with. They're like, hey, I got this accepted offer from, Rocket Mortgage, and they're using 6.9 in the offer to purchase. And I'm thinking to myself, interest rates are 7.5. No listing agent is going to accept that because it gives the buyer the right to walk away from the deal, essentially. So add a buffer. Rates are extremely volatile these days, way more so than they have been in the last couple of years. And what that means is we're seeing rates change 1/4 of a point overnight. So add more of a buffer now than maybe you would in the last couple of years. If the rate for your client is 7.25 and you ask me what to put in there, I'll say 7.75.
Okay. See, that's quite a jump. I always tell people 1/4%. So thank you for that.
Yeah, Steph, I think, a year ago that would have been fine, but just because of the volatility, and you can kind of see in this chart here, this is the bond market. The moves every day are just phenomenal. So it's been crazy.
Okay.
And then here's just kind of a chart of where rates have been for the last couple of years. They're the highest they've been since 2000. And higher rates means more volatility. Just kind of put this all into perspective for you guys.
That's a hard pill to swallow.
It's made life a lot of fun the last couple of months.
Any questions so far? And there are no dumb questions. I mean, this is all, talking numbers can be difficult. So
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's all very nuanced. So yeah, like you said, no dumb questions. We get questions every day from agents who've been in the business for 5 years on all this stuff. So
Hey, I have a question. I stepped away for a minute. Blake, this is Robin McCormick. Hi there. So when you say to put in a buffer, and this is what I might have missed when I stepped away, should it be 1/4%? Or are you suggesting a half? Because we also got to make sure the, buyer is qualified at those, elevated rates.
yeah, really good question. And that's why I advise talking to your loan officer while you're writing the contract and writing the offer to purchase.
Okay.
The reason I tell my agents 0.5% is just because of the market volatility. And I think that also makes the offer stronger, just because it has more buffer for your buyers. You can
Right.
certainly use 1/4%. It's just safer to use a half, really, and it can be your personal preference.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, here's a question that we get at least twice a week from everybody. What's the difference between getting an appraisal waiver from your lender and waiving the appraisal contingency on the offer to purchase? So an appraisal waiver is something that your lender or loan officer will tell you whether or not you need an appraisal or not. And it's not actually dictated by us. It's dictated by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So those pictures there are 2 pictures of what we see when Fannie or Freddie tells us that you don't need an actual appraisal. So you can get an appraisal waiver, meaning we don't need an appraisal at all. Waiving your appraisal. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, and maybe I should let you finish. I have a question about the appraisal waiver as far as, are you able to determine that before somebody writes an offer? And you're probably going to address that.
Yeah, really good question. We can determine whether we need an appraisal or not. All we need is the price that you're going to write and the property address. because then we'll plug it into the system and it goes through an algorithm. The stronger the file, the more likely you are to get an appraisal waiver. And then the algorithm basically tells us if we need an appraisal or not.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So does down payment and all of that go into this appraisal waiver or not? Or is it merely based on value?
A little bit of both. Good question. So it does look at your down payment, your loan to value. You're way more likely to get one if you do 25% down rather than 15%. It looks at your credit score. It looks at your reserves, so how many assets you have. It looks at your debt to income ratio. But then it also looks at how many appraisals have been registered with Fannie and Freddie within that area in the last year. And if the numbers make sense, it will give you an appraisal waiver.
Okay.
So there does need to be a history of appraisals being done within the last year in that area.
Okay.
And that's, you know, a lot of you, when you waive your appraisal contingency, that doesn't necessarily mean we don't need an appraisal. We still might need an appraisal. But what you're saying is, even if the value of the appraisal comes in low, it's not going to kill the deal. The deal's not contingent on having an appraisal come in at value. And one thing I'll add to that is, which I'm sure you all are aware of, is you can add in gap language for your appraisal. So you can say in your offer to purchase, we still want an appraisal, but if it comes in, say, $10,000 lower, that's okay. My buyers will cover that gap. So that's adding in gap language.
Mhm.
And if you waive it altogether, you're saying it doesn't matter how low it comes in, we're still moving forward with the purchase.
Here's the $1,000,000 question that I've talked with several different lenders, and all of us agents have talked, and we've talked about them in meetings, is that when you write an offer, if you don't have the appraisal contingency checked in your offer, the bank or the lender still has to, in most cases, still has to do an appraisal. So is the buyer protected if that is not checked? Because in my history and experience, they still have to meet the financing contingency. If the appraisal comes in low and the lender says, sorry, that we're not going to lend, the value isn't there for what you're trying to obtain, the buyer is then still protected, so to speak, right?
Yeah, so it gets a little tricky because let's say you're purchasing, say, a $750,000 house and your buyer's putting 3% down, and the appraisal comes in $50,000 low, and they have waived their appraisal contingency. Now the question is, do they have that $50,000 to cover the gap between the appraised value and the purchase price? And if the answer is no, they don't, then they get denied based on financing because they don't have enough cash to close. So really the question should be from a buyer's agent to your loan officer is, do they have the funds to cover a $50,000 gap if it comes in low?
Yeah, and I think a lot of buyers too, or buyers agents, think that if the buyer is getting tenuous about staying in the contract, and they think, oh, I still can get out on financing, if the appraisal comes in low, and they find out, no, they can't, because the lender will still loan to that, even though the appraisal is low, it doesn't automatically mean they can't get financing. And I think that was a gap that a lot of us didn't realize, a lot of agents didn't realize as they're practicing, is that lenders will lend, as you say, even without an appraisal or with a low appraisal. So
Yeah.
It's not an automatic escape for a buyer.
Especially if we've seen their bank statements and their investment accounts and their 401ks,
Mhm.
we can't issue a denial letter just because the buyer wants out of the deal.
Right.
We need a valid reason to deny the loan. So if we see the funds and enough to cover that gap, we won't send a denial letter.
Right.
We just
What?
can't.
Okay, I appreciate that. You brought up something though. This is interesting. You mentioned 401k. What if someone's 50,000 blanket funds is all in a 401k? That's not immediate cash or, liquid, so to speak. So you're saying if a lender sees that amount of money in a 401k,
Well,
they can't really force a buyer to empty that.
yeah,
Right?
that's true. There's other things that go into like seeing funds from the 401k. So when we send a file into underwriting, it asks where the funds are coming from. And if the buyer has stated early on in the process that they are using funds from the 401k, I think their fee would be held to the fire. But generally we won't send asset statements to the lender unless we plan on using those assets. So if the buyer plans on using the 401k and they stated as such, and we've seen their statements, I think they would have to. That's actually a good question, Robin. I'm not sure what would happen if they just change their mind that they don't want to liquidate their 401k.
Well, that's just it. I mean, I can see if they said, yep, this is our plan. We're gonna, pay the penalty and take the money and use that. But if that is not their intent, that's the only reason I asked. I'm like, well, I've never heard of, them being able to force a buyer to proceed based on some of their more locked in funds, so to speak.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think, go ahead, Blake.
Oh, I was going to say, I think that it's going to be dependent on how the file is set up and sent to underwriting. Like I said, if the buyer said in the beginning that they were using their 401k funds, then they might be liable for that. But I'm going to check on that because that's a good question.
Thank you.
I think as buyers agents and listing agents, making offers and receiving offers when it comes to this, I think a good rule of thumb as buyers agents, as Blake already mentioned, ask the lender, okay, if we're going to waive the appraisal, can they truly go forward without, or no matter what the appraisal outcome is. And then on the flip side, as a listing agent, when you receive an offer without an appraisal contingency and nothing else is addressed about it in the offer itself, my first phone call would be back to the buyer's agent and say, okay, if there is an appraisal needed for a financing contingency, can your buyer cover it? Because as a listing agent, I might just, like, this is a false promise, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that they couldn't get out on the financing contingency potentially. So I think it would just be being smart from the listing side and making sure that there's verbiage in there to say, well, no matter the outcome of an appraisal, if one is needed for the financing contingency, this buyer cannot serve a rejection letter based off of a low appraisal, right? So it's just kind of covering our sellers in that regard.
Yeah, that's a good point, Steph. As the listing agent, just do your due diligence when they waive their appraisal. In the last couple of years, there's been agents, I don't even think Keller Williams agents, but just agents out there who go in with that strategy, waiving it with the mindset of, well, if it comes in low, we'll just get you out on financing. We'll say you were getting a gift from your mom for the down payment, and then your mom changed her mind, like easy peasy.
Right.
I mean, that's all under the table stuff. I don't think anybody wants to do that, but as a listing agent, just certainly do your due diligence.
Yeah, we've certainly had situations like that where it's a surprise.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a little under the table is right, but some people are playing it.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right.
No, cool. This doesn't happen that often anymore, but it used to. I think agents have just wised up, but don't include personal property in the offer to purchase. This is a good example of what we like to see not included in purchase price, seller's personal property. If you want to do any sort of personal property in the deal, leave it out of the offer to purchase. But what a lot of people do is just a bill of sale outside of what they send the lender, and they do a bill of sale for $0. Because what happens is if you do put personal property in the offer to purchase, a lender is going to most likely require to get appraised. And then they reduce the purchase price by that appraised value, because you're basically saying the house is worth 400,000 with all of the seller's personal property. But if you get rid of that personal property, it's only worth 375.
Sure.
For an example. So just be sure there's no personal property listed in your offer to purchase. It doesn't happen that often anymore.
But the things you have written here, I mean, those are the standards and those are okay.
Yeah, yep. It's nothing of real value. Okay, the wrecker. And I'm interested actually to hear from Steph and Joan. Because if I have a buyer who's saying they call me before, we're like, hey, the well needs an inspection and it's not working. It's listed in the wrecker. What should we do? We usually say lenders don't require the wrecker most of the time. So if you don't reference it in the addendum and you don't attach the wrecker to the package that you send me, then 90% of the time the underwriter is not going to ask for the wrecker.
Yeah, this has been an ongoing debate that I've had as a manager for years. I personally, as an agent, I never included the wrecker when I was sending documents to the loan officer. And I've had arguments with agents that say that has to be sent to the lender because it's referenced in the offer, in a section of the offer talking about the date of the real estate condition report. And because it's referenced in the offer, it has to be sent to the lender. And I always say, ask the lender.
Don't reference it.
Don't reference it. And we've had situations where it becomes a problem getting a loan because what the underwriter saw in the real estate condition report. So I'm glad to hear you say this. I'm going to forward it to that agent.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what I was going to ask. If we see it referenced in the main section of the offer on like page 3 or whatever it is, but don't attach it here on line 573, is your underwriter going to ask for it?
If it's referenced, they'll ask for it. Yeah.
They will ask for it.
But you're saying it's hard printed in the offer when it talks about the date of the record. Is that considered referencing it?
Good question. What line is that, Joan?
It's here, I can pull it up real quick.
It just talks about when it was signed, the date it was signed.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
so the
what
main
the decision
section,
is.
I would love to get this hashed out because I've never not included it. And I'm definitely somebody who probably would tell people they have to. So
I was saying the opposite.
yeah, I'm glad that you're.
Yeah, well, I've had a couple of deals recently where I actually saved them. I saved the deals from a credit union because the agents had sent the wrecker in and things on it were a little squirrely. And I said, okay, don't reference it in the offer to purchase and send it to me and we'll just go through my underwriters and we won't ask for it.
Okay. Well, okay, so in the offer, it's page 2 and it starts at line 105. The section property condition representations. So Blake, in this section, it just says seller represents to buyer that as of the state of acceptance, seller has no notice or knowledge of conditions affecting the property and other than those identified in seller's real estate condition report dated. And then we take the date from the real estate condition report and enter it here on line 107.
Gotcha.
So this is where it would be referenced typically.
Okay.
And it
And not
talks about the rescission time.
right, and not necessarily attached on like line 573. So
Okay.
if it is referenced there, do you think your underwriters would be asking for it? Or do you want to come back to us with that?
I'll come back to you on that.
Okay.
I'm guessing if the verbiage that you stated, Steph, was actually there is like a defect, then they might. So
Okay.
I'll check on that for you.
Okay.
Okay,
We'll report back.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
Just I want to make a comment because just in practice, I'd never attach the wrecker on that line 573 because it's already incorporated into the offer. So I'm just wondering if maybe underwriters are really only looking at line 573
Yeah, they might be.
because they're just looking at what's attached. So
Yeah.
yeah, I've never put it on the 573
yeah.
as being attached.
Okay.
I haven't either. I've never put it there either.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I was thinking. The proof is in the pudding, right? We don't put it there and they don't ask. So
Yeah.
I will say too, some lenders just have different policies. I know when I was at Fairway, a lot of the times, even whether it was referenced or not, the underwriters would ask for the wrecker. So maybe
Okay.
it just depends on the lender, like an overlay. A lot of different lenders have different overlays, meaning different rules for different lenders.
Sure.
So, but I know
Well,
I've had luck not sending in records, so I'll get some answers for you.
On the same line, if there's an inspection contingency checked in an offer, that means that the inspection report has to be sent to the lender. Is that right? Or
No, never, ever send us the inspection.
exactly. So it's referenced in the offer
Oh,
under inspection contingency, but not required to be sent into the lender.
Oh, that's a good point, Joan. Yeah,
totally good point. Thank you for that.
yeah.
I'm always looking for escapes.
Yeah. I actually had a deal where the transaction coordinator attached the inspection report on the very bottom of the offer to purchase, and it got uploaded to the file. And then we had 2 more unnecessary conditions from underwriting based on the inspection report that the appraiser didn't call out. So it would not have ever been a problem if we didn't have that inspection report. So never, ever send us the inspection report. We don't care.
And we definitely train on that.
Yeah.
So good stuff. Thanks, Blake.
Yeah, no problem. That's all I have now. I know I have a couple questions I'll get back to you guys on. I'll just email Joan and Steph and you guys can send it out to the team. But if any of you have any questions at all, here's my cell phone number and my email. I'm always available for questions. So
I think if we can spend a little bit more time. I just wanted to kind of speak to other considerations in the offer writing process as far as being strategic when in competitive offer writing. And if you could speak to closing date. So, I know there are some lenders out there. I've got a preferred lender who I like to use just because I know he can close in 21 days.
sure.
So do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, our turn times are really fast. We can get same day or 1 day initial underwrites from underwriting, which is great. I would say our appraisals are about 10 days, loan commitments 12 or 14 days, and then
Okay.
we can close in 21 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you say about appraisals, Blake? How quick?
10 or 12 days, but usually they're coming in within 10 days.
Okay. And you said the loan is 14
Loan
days?
commitment 12 or 14 days.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And if you don't mind, I don't mean to monopolize this, but anyone can ask, I guess, but do you have any kind of a program currently because of the rates? Some other of your competition is offering lifetime refinance at no charge to the client?
Yeah, good question, Robin. I'll say this, sure, we can do that, but I'll also put a little asterisk next to that and say there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Oh, I
So-
know. I understand that, but I
Yeah,
mean, that's what,
Yep, we can do a zero cost refinance lifetime. Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure it's probably hidden then in the interest rate. So, I mean, you guys got to make up for it somehow, I
yeah,
suppose.
exactly. Yeah, what the lender does is they give just a slightly higher interest rate to give that lender credit to offset the costs.
Okay.
It
Thank you.
wouldn't
I
be
have a
like,
question.
it wouldn't
Oh.
be multiple times, would it?
No,
No.
I don't think anyone's saying forever. I think they're just saying your first refi.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question, Blake. It's come up a couple of times, more recently, I've seen kind of a trend in it. Where, an appraiser on basic conventional loan, not an FHA or a VA, is calling out, things that need to be done to the house. Usually foundation problems or roof problems. So the appraiser in a way is coming in like another inspector and causing,
Trouble.
Yeah.
So I've had a comment like that just last week.
Yeah, I saw that posted in the chat. I would say that shouldn't necessarily be the case. I would say if it's a visible deficiency in like the roof or the basement, just from looking at it, the underwriter, or not the underwriter, the appraiser does have the authority to comment on it. Because he or she might see it as a safety hazard. Usually the easiest thing to do in that case is just have your loan officer argue it, just saying this isn't, part of the conventional appraisal guidelines. Or sometimes you might just need a letter from a licensed contractor saying this is not a safety hazard, and then it can get waived. There is an underwriter that somehow snuck onto our panel, not an underwriter, sorry, an appraiser that somehow snuck onto our panel who is more strict on that stuff. And because of that reason, I've been fighting for the last week to kick him off of our panel because I think he's overstepping like what he's paid to do.
So just to be clear, because last week we were commenting about this and Joan and I were trying to make the distinction that maybe appraisers are trying to flag these things because it does affect value if there is potentially a $10,000 or $15,000 basement repair. But you are saying that they are coming from the angle that it might be a safety issue. Is that really their concerns when it comes to flagging these things?
It would be a safety issue, yeah, because
Okay.
if it's gonna be something that they require to be repaired, they'll mark the appraisal as subject to repairs. But
Okay,
they'll give the value as if it was repaired.
got it.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
That's
an
why I
answer.
think, I forget who posted in the chat and I asked the question, was it subject to or was it as is? Because that makes a little bit of a difference on how you'd approach it with your loan officer.
got
And
it.
it's a little different from an FHA appraiser. We're
Right,
saying it
right.
has to be fixed prior to closing.
Yeah. And if I would say if the appraiser marks the appraisal as is, but still had those comments in there, but the underwriter is still pushing back on those things in the appraisal needing to be addressed, I would argue all day that they don't need to be addressed. The appraisal's as is. He's not a contractor. He's not an inspector. Like this is overzealous conditioning.
And I'd love to, kind of now that we're talking about like the players in the lending side, just for our new people, just having like an understanding with like the communication flow, like, we've got our appraiser, we've got the lender who's the face of this with the buyer and with us. And we've got the underwriters who are kind of the ones like calling the shots. And they're the ones who we really need to like appease.
Yeah. Scratch their backs.
Yeah. So just again, just kind of like a organizational chart, if you will, for our new guys, just like kind of how that process works. Like if there's ever kind of any sort of hiccup, it's generally the underwriter who's pushing back either on the buyer or the appraiser or the lender itself. So
Yeah, that's a really good question, Steph, and I'm glad you brought that up. And I say that because as buyer agents, I would say one of the most important things that you can have on your side is a loan officer that is creative, that is competent, and that is willing to throw off the gloves for you and get the deal closed no matter what. Because there's the appraiser, there's title, there's underwriting, there may be lawyers involved, all that stuff. And they're all going to have different opinions on whether this house is, fundable. And so you need a loan officer that can act as the quarterback and make sure that the underwriter isn't over conditioning. And if they are, your loan officer needs to step in and say, this is overkill, and fight it. Or if you have an appraiser that forgot 2 really good comps in the report, you need a loan officer that can step in there and submit a reconsideration of value and let the appraiser know that you think they are wrong. If title is unwilling to remove a judgment from 7 years ago, you need a loan officer that can step in and say, these aren't the guidelines, remove it. So there's just a ton of different moving pieces, and there's a lot of room for things to go wrong, or not wrong, just add, headaches to our buyers. So work with loan officers that you trust, that are creative, that are competent, and that, want to get the deal closed as badly as you do.
That's another plug for local lenders. I mean, when you're working with a national company, no name, you're just another cog in the wheel that's going along, and you have like no real communication with the lender 9 times out of 10, and they don't have any incentive to keep things together when they're
Right.
working on a lot of files,
Right.
so just a
Yeah,
plug.
they're not local and they get paid maybe a salary. So whether the deal closes to them, it doesn't matter. They're getting paid the same.
Sure. Okay.
Cream City Mortgage, I'll just be frank with you. We are commission only, and we get paid by the lender. So it doesn't cost our buyers anything, but we only get paid if the deal closes.
Right.
So that's why we fight so hard.
So Blake, you are loan officer and founder of Cream City Mortgage. So when you take a loan, are they sold right away? You guys aren't housing them yourself, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Robin. We work with different lenders, and I know the semantics of all of this gets a little bit confusing. So we're the broker. We can work with different lenders. And when we get a buyer with an accepted offer, we'll match them up with a lender right away. And that's who we start the underwriting process with. So for example, if John Smith gets an accepted offer tonight, I might send him to United Wholesale Mortgage, and that's where we'll go on our path to closing. And so United Wholesale Mortgage will underwrite it. We'll get the appraisal with them, and then they might service it for 6 months, or they might sell it to a different servicing company.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. But that's what gives us flexibility in some of the loan programs that we have. And like I said, our rates, depending on the client, we have different programs for different people.
Right.
And there's nothing that how do I want to ask this? Like nothing that you don't do. I mean, you can do a VA loan, FHA, jumbo, the whole, okay.
Yeah, all of it. I'd say there are 2 things that we don't do, or we don't do well. HELOCs, really, we don't do. And lot loans, we don't really do.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah, we just kind of skate our lane. We stay away from those for now.
You do construction loans?
We can do one-time construction loans, yeah. One-time closed construction loans, yeah. You can give those to Gustavo. We'll do that.
Okay, any other questions? Joan, can you think of any other considerations that we should ask?
No, but in our questions that Steph and I get, when they do deal with loan and lenders and lending and all of that, I like to recommend talking to a lender as opposed to staff or to me, because we're not lenders and that's not our area of expertise. You know, it's the same thing as insurance and all the other different functions of writing a contract. Go to the expert, go to the source. You know, people were talking about, what do you need in an FHA loan? Go ask a lender. They'll have a list of what's necessary to FHA loan. So I appreciate your helping us, Blake, and answering our questions and doing such a nice job explaining what goes into a contract.
Yeah,
And what
you're
does.
welcome. Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And, you know, if we need a follow-up meeting in the next couple of months, happy to do it. Or any questions, you guys have my contact info. And I will get back to you with those 2 questions.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Blake. Thank you, Steph, Joan. And I think the biggest thing I got from this, a lot of good information, but also, Blake, that, you know, you kind of babysit and with the client all the way through and stepping in when things might get a little muddy. That is so important. So important. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I tell my agents, over communicate until you're asked not to.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah,
See
have a
you
good day,
next
everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thanks.